It's going to be an interesting morning. We had a wonderful guest lined up this morning, but it turns out that we had a scheduling conflict. And so, guess what, guys? You've got me. And you know what? We're going to talk about the news. You know what's my most disappointing thing about this morning? As you see, I got this nice t shirt, my Brit suspenders. But we were going to have a little discussion about Kansas because being born in Kansas, I've never been so proud of my home state in my life. And good morning, Andrew. Glad to see you on board. Since it is just you and me, it's going to be a conversation. Hey, Barb, with you and me and what's on my mind. I mean, you guys have been there when we've got the real talkative guests. I tend to keep my mouth shut. Well, guess what? This morning I get to chat. Uh, and yes, yay for Kansas. It just goes to show what I've believed all along. The 30% of America is a bunch of big mouths who all they want to do is make everybody believe that they speak for America. Well, guess what? Kansas spoke for America, the whole damn state. And 60% of them said, what? No, you're not going to take our rights away. No, you can't. And that was phenomenal. When I read those results, all I could think of it was, you know, this is what happens when you actually let the people speak up and think about what's going on. And good morning, Theo and Gordon. Yeah, Gordon Lenzer. He's in our new anthology we have coming out. Now, Gordon's, everybody should probably know Gordon. He's a hell of a guy. But he wrote the story Scream Stream. And he was on the show here about 6 months ago, 3, 4 months ago, whatever. And I'd been working on the edits, and I just told him on the show, I said, hey, dude, you're in. And I haven't been sorry since. The So you're going to see me looking down at my screen occasionally, glancing through the feed, because this is where you guys, if you got questions, we will answer them. But also, this is where Bob gets to rant since I don't have a guest. Um, and I just got to say that micro 30% of America that says, oh, we don't want to teach uh, history in our schools because, oh my God, it might come down to the fact that my ancestors screwed over other people. Well, guess what? Don't be surprised. Don't be that terribly broken up by it because you know what? Everybody's ancestors has screwed over somebody else's um, people. And it's not looking in the past that you are got to focus on. It's look ahead and say, hey, what am I going to do to make sure that my kids don't say that my ancestors screwed over other people? It's like voting. Right now, the nation is a cross patch of voting laws that say basically, if you're in a semi red state, wow, we don't have enough people to win elections, so what are we going to do? That's it. We'll keep these other people from voting. Kind of like Texas, where they went into their four largest counties and made special rules for them, and they've wound up rejecting an incredible percentage of ballots from those states, those areas. Because I got to tell you, Governor Abbott is scared shitless right now of Beto O'Rourke. Now, what did that say there? Somebody told me here. I should get my granddaughter in here and tell her to handle the news, handle the keyboard. We had a higher voter turnout um, than in Kansas. You know, they did. They had a voter turnout that was just phenomenal. I think it was Joseph Huey, one of my writers, said that He took his mother and his wife and his daughter, and they went to the polls to make sure they voted. And he took his daughter just to show her how it was done, remove that fear that, oh my God, it's the voting. So while many of us are not, would not go on and say, hey, we are pro abortion, we are absolutely pro choice, meaning it's the woman's choice. It's not the government's choice. And when the government starts trying to tell you what you can do with your body, pretty soon they're going to be telling you, um, oh, pick a topic, whatever. But good morning, Daniel or David. Sorry, I don't read real well. And we talk about, screwing over people. Most of you don't remember the Civil War. What do we got? Oh, Barbara was talking about an ancestor's will where she found out that they bequeathed a slave. Yeah, I have the same will, not the same will, but I have a will. One of my ancestors was sheriff in Spotsylvania County back in the old days, and I was reading it, and it was kind of like, oh wow, I can't claim that my descendants were all the good guys. Uh, Nobody can. So anyway, and in the news, anybody here feel really bad for Alex Jones? I don't. I couldn't find it in my heart to feel bad for that man. In fact, if I had my druthers when I build his prison cell, I would load it with 27 geese, angry geese, and but that's probably cruel and unusual punishment. I don't believe in cruel and unusual punishment, unlike Clarence Thomas. And so, yeah, Alex Jones, screw you. You got what you deserve, $45 million. And you know what? I don't care if you have to live out the rest of your life on Social Security eating top ramen. You are an evil bastard, and you should stay an evil bastard. But the oh yeah, Andrew's telling me how he enjoys the comeuppance that uh, the Andrew that Alex Jones got. You go back to me at my point on the ducks or putting them in a prison cell with 27 geese. Anybody who's been around geese knows that they can be some crabby little animals, and you don't mess with geese. Uh, that man, as Barbara's telling us, he hurt people. He just flat hurt people. Uh, oh yeah, okay. I'll give you that one, George. Maybe we don't want to be cruel to the geese, but you know what? Eh, they don't deserve it either. I know, but it's a fun world. You remember I made an earlier crack about cruel and unusual punishment? There's a story I heard once, and I looked it up. It turned out it was true, and it's why I think Clarence Thomas shouldn't be on the Supreme Court. Not just because his wife is a corrupt politician and tried to uh, steal an election and turn our country into a dictatorship slash theocracy. It was many years ago. A court case came up. An inmate had been tied to a chair, and then the guards beat him. They broke his glasses, broke his jaw, other injuries that basically sent him to the infirmary for a while. And he claimed that that was cruel and unusual. It shouldn't have happened. And Clarence Thomas's decision, bless his freaking Nazi ass, um, said, well, in my opinion, the damage done to the inmate wasn't severe enough to merit being called cruel and unusual. Well, guess what? When you're in the hands of the American justice system, you are not less of a person. You are still a human being, and you deserve to be treated with some degree of dignity. Yes, you have to atone for your crimes or stay in prison to protect society, whatever your decision, whatever your perspective on that. But the moment I start tying you into a chair and beating the crap out of you, guess what? You've crossed the line. Those people should have gone to, I mean, I don't care if they went to jail for 2 weeks or 2 days or 2 months, but there has to be accountability, because when accountability is not available um, to the rich and the powerful, or the badged people, as I will call them, because God knows in America we have gone into badge worship over the past 40 years. I'm just appalled. Yes, law enforcement needs leeway. Law enforcement needs the ability to protect themselves. But this current concept that says the only excuse you need is if you're wearing a badge to kill a human being, to kill a citizen of this country, is that I was afraid. Reminds me of a story of a woman who tasered a guy twice. She was a cop. She was by herself. She hit him with her taser twice, and he's laying on the ground twitching. And she's giving him the show me your hands. His hands were underneath his body, and he was still twitching. Since she couldn't see his hands, he shot her. She shot him. Guys, I mean, while the courts and the police unions all said, "Oh, that was justifiable," the fundamental facts of life are: if you can't deal with a situation where you're afraid without pulling out your gun and shooting somebody, then you're in the wrong line of work. I don't care. You just are. Um, Oh yeah, Andrew Lucas. Canada geese are the worst. Yeah, I know. We get enough Canada geese up here that I mean, you go out there and there's hundreds and hundreds of them on the riverbanks. Because if you guys don't know it, I live in Washington State on the right on 200 yards from the Yakima River, and close enough to the Snake and the Columbia. I can go take the dogs in there anytime I want to, and Canada geese can be fun. Morning, Cheryl. In case you missed it, we had a conflict with my guest this morning, scheduling conflict. She will be here on 9/11. She is it's Randee Dawn. The, yeah, what is this comment? Let's put it up there. Law enforcement needs limits. Yes, I'm a firm believer in modifying qualified immunity. If you are an evil bastard wearing a badge, you're still an evil bastard whether or not you're wearing a badge. And we all know not all people with badges are evil bastards. I've known many wonderful ones. I am related to many wonderful ones, and I appreciate the work they do and the sacrifice. But just remember, being a coal miner, being a convenience store clerk is a more dangerous occupation than being a police officer. Probably not as stressful. I'll give you that. But oh, hey, yes, Cheryl, you've got me. And as Andrew said, limits and consequences. By God, the government needs limits and consequences. Speaking of limits and consequences, it has nothing to do with limits and consequences. But I was looking at something the other day. We always hear the old adage, old white men are ruining this country. Well, being an old white man, sometimes I take exception to that. But going back to Kansas and Roe v. Wade, it was Kansas that um, voted to say no uh, onto the abortion thing. And but when Roe v. Wade was decided, with one exception, it was a bunch of old white men that made that vote. Um, when the suffrage was finally recognized as an inherent right It was a bunch of old white men made that vote. Now, granted, they probably had their wives poking them with a stick saying, "You're going to vote this way." And thank God they did. But we talked a little bit on this show about the recognition of women's rights. Um, and you know what? I don't call it the granting of women's rights. They've had the right all along for most all of this stuff we're talking about. People in this country have the right. But sometimes getting the government, the powerful, to recognize it is the hard part. Oh man, did you see? Oh, Jon Stewart's tweet eviscerating Ted Cruz as a coward and a liar. Oh, come on. We got to be nice to Cancun Cruz. I mean, what kind of balls does it take to, in the middle of winter, when half your state doesn't have power, people are freezing to death, to say, I'm going to Cancun, and then blame your daughters for it? That is not cowardice. It's stupidity. It's insensitivity. It's a complete lack of empathy. And it's an example of why you should not be representing anybody in Congress. Um, you should more likely be standing on the back of a garbage truck on a hot summer day in New York City, throwing garbage cans, emptying garbage cans into the back. But it don't make you a coward. It just makes you stupid. Uh, the Yeah, Barbaro notes that they recognize the rights. Yeah, it's funny. It's a lot of the blue states out west. They had no issues with women voting. I think it was Wyoming, if I can be look back in my whatever's left up here that used to be my brain. You know, what can they say? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Um, but hey, I'm still here, sorta. Yeah. The funny thing about being old, you know who's old today? How old do you think Mitch McConnell is? He's 80. I think Biden is 78 or 79. Um, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is 82. Good God. I thought for the idea, I mean, I'm not saying they can't be leaders because they're old. Obviously, they can. Biden, I think, is doing a pretty good job, as long as you don't ask a Republican. I still got Republicans that believe every conspiracy theory they've heard, except for climate change. And I tell you, if you show up next week, we're going to have a powerful, good show on climate change. The um, yeah. The so anyway, you can't knock them just because they're old. You got to knock them when they can't change, they can't think, and that's one of the things I like about Biden. I think it was back in the Obama administration. Biden has been famous for not the the wiring in his brain, between his brain and his mouth. He has got far more efficient wiring than most of us, and so whatever's going through his brain would tend to come out his mouth. And he made some comment on gay marriage back in the Obama administration, and the next thing you know, everybody's saying, "Oh, gee, wow, I guess you're right. Why are we opposed to it?" And the beautiful thing here is that it's your ability to change. It's your ability to recognize that what you did 10 years ago may not have been a good idea, may not have been the right answer. I can still remember myself as a 20 something, and I grew up, I was born in Kansas, but did most of my growing up in Texas. And the I'd gone through the Navy, had my honest to God first knowing encounter with gay people, and wow, um, they were my friends, no big issue. And then went on and started working in theater, and it was like up until that point, I'd always had this opinion that said I'm pretty open about this stuff. I don't got any issue with those people. Uh, I mean, it's not like they're um, teaching my kid in school. And I can tell you what, that moment that that thought entered my head, it hung around there for a couple of months. And then all of a sudden, I had this epiphany that it's obvious to most of you guys, but for me, it was a life changing epiphany that said, wait a second. So what if they're teaching our kids in school? Does it matter? Are they in, I mean, they're teaching math, they're teaching science, they're teaching how to write a decent sentence. What does who they love have to do with it? And that was a moment where my brain turned over, and it was like I can't go back to Texas anymore because it just ain't right. Now I do go back to Texas. I have family living there. Um, Laura Menendez says, I'm 61 and Biden is better shape than I am, and he recovered faster from COVID. Oh, hell yeah. I had an ankle replaced. I broke it up pretty bad when I was in the Navy. Long story. Don't want to hear it. But up until then, I rode my bike fairly routinely. Since that event, I have not been back on my bicycle. Biden got mocked for getting the clips on his shoes tangled up in his pedals, and anybody who rides a bicycle knows that that's going to happen occasionally. And when that happens, you fall on your ass if you're lucky. The But they seem to forget the basic fundamental thing. The man was out riding a bicycle. The man's fit. You know, I saw a meme the other day, made me laugh. It was a picture of Donald Trump standing next to Joe Biden, or actually superimposed next to Joe Biden. And the meme said, there's old, and then there's old. Biden's an old fella, but he's not an idiot. Um, yes, I like that, Charlie, or Charles, excuse me. Uh, it says just because that's the way it was. I mean, I used to have a fellow work for me. He wrote on his whiteboard because his QB was right outside my office, and he wrote it so I would see it. Indecision is the key to flexibility. Um, and I love that quote. I actually kept it around for a long time, because even after he moved on, because if you are so all fired sure of things that you can never let your mind be changed, then you're probably a Republican or a fundy. Excuse me. Is fundy a bad word? Well, good. Um, you've got to. Oh, good. I get to call Charles Charlie. The um, fun part of it is that is our brains are meant to change. Our mind is meant to change. Are you the same person that you were before you had kids and realized there's bigger things in the world than you? There's more important things than going out with the guys and drinking yourself silly? Hell no. You learned out that you learned to look ahead. What people, every almost every culture in America realizes. It's corny, but our children are our future. Got to raise them right, and that don't mean beating them, teaching them that the only way to resolve an issue is by bending them over your knee and smacking them. I got a daughter I'm so proud of, and one time in her entire life, I bent her over my knee, and I looked at that and said, "How did she feel? How did I feel?" And I realized that was not the right way. Um, you know, I remember having to go out and cut a switch. Oh my God. Um, no, you don't train children to be better people, to train them to be adults by training them that the bigger person always wins. Uh, Listen to them, talk to them. They're good kids. The uh, So anyway, as I go on to my rants, this morning and we'll probably cut short because I've been ranting for 30 minutes and I'll keep going as long as you let me. I got a funny feeling this might not be the highest rated show we ever did, but you know what? You guys showed up and we're going to chat. So, if there's anybody got any questions that they want to have answered on this show, please do because I will answer them. Uh, Now, the reason I didn't have another guest this morning, as I said, there was a scheduling conflict. And 11:30 last night, when I was sending out page proofs for a book, I hadn't checked my email, and she had let me know. So it's not her fault. The responsibility lies right here, and that's something. Get me going on that one. Responsibility, accountability. Politicians, I love them. I liked Al Gore. You know, he's the first presidential candidate that I really, really worked for. But you got to remember, I was a kid, lived through the Nixon administration, watched all the hearings. Oh, God, we can get going on the hearings. Watched Watergate. And you know who today, one politician that I admire more than I ever thought I would, and that is Liz Cheney. Because we always hear the notion that says politicians are going to getting reelected over the good of the people. And I had grown to believe that. And you know what I believe now? Most politicians will put getting reelected over the good of the people. But Liz Cheney, I'm not in her brain. I don't know what she's thinking. Maybe she's thinking that she's going to be the third party presidential candidate. Uh, but she put her career, her family name, uh, over getting reelected, over continuing in Congress. But of course, looking at the people she has to hang around with in Congress, I'm beginning to think that might not be a bad idea. I mean, seriously, um, would you want to go to work every day if you thought you had to interact with Matt Getz? You know, if you had a teenage daughter, would you invite him over to your house for a barbecue? Oh, hell no. Uh, the Oh yeah, the Texas. Yeah, so David McDonald recognizes that I didn't get arrested in Texas. I don't think I've ever been arrested in Texas. No, none of my arrests have ever occurred in Texas. I've had a few in other places, but that's a long story. And once again, a story none of you guys really care about. Uh, but yeah, I was down in Texas. There's a church down there called the Church of Christ. It's a wonderful church full of wonderful people. I grew up, and right next to the Church of Christ is the church that I attended as a child. And and I remember I went to the first service there after the new church was built, and they took the old church and turned it sideways. That old church was a church where my parents were married in. So I felt like I was on home turf. And so I took my sister, bless her heart, she voted for Trump. But she thinks that sometimes the Republicans are stupid. She and me and my dog, yeah, I took Vicky with me. She's my little service animal. She keeps me sane. And it's hard to put that on a certificate. And we took our signs and we went out there across the street from that church, those two churches, and we protested the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Church people waved at us. Many of them thought it was stupid. And I'm going to go back to Kansas. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're stupid, doesn't mean you don't recognize women's rights. It's just that if you look down the pew, you're going to find people who don't. You'll find a lot of people who don't. But they were waving. Nobody flipped us off. Nobody complained. But then, out of nowhere, this big giant pickup truck screeches to a halt in a laundromat parking lot. And out comes, I will tell you, Central Casting sent him over. He's the big bellied, Dunlop, red faced, jowly cheeked fella who tells us that we're protesting on his property and we need to get the hell off. Now I looked up at the power lines and I looked where the right of way was on the street and the sidewalk width. And I said, "We're not on your property." But he kept after it until finally he told me he was going to call the sheriff. And I said, "The sheriff just drove by." "Really?" "Well, he's a good friend of mine. I'm going to call him." Well, about 20 minutes later, here come the city cops. They issued me a citation, a warning citation for criminal trespass. But we were done anyway, so we packed it up and left. But I just got to laugh. It's he wasn't in church that Sunday morning. He wasn't out there doing anything except harassing people that are trying to speak up for American rights. Uh, the uh, the It's all fun, but I got to tell you, the oh, darn it! You know, those of you who are of a similar age may notice that once in a while a train of thought gets lost because I got to think about that next thing I'm going to say, and it came in my brain, and I'm starting to open my mouth, and what happens? Woo, it flew away like one of Jim Wright's herons. Speaking of Jim Wright, you guys see his heron pictures? They are beautiful. The Yes, I know, Barb. I was on the public right of way, but I'll tell you one thing that I have learned over the years and more than a few uh, encounters with law enforcement. Explaining to them why you're right and they're wrong will not necessarily have much of a good outcome. What I tend to do is I nod my head a lot and say, yes, sir, because, like I said, we were done anyway and was, um, I wasn't gonna, you know. And here's the real funny part. The cop said, "Well, you could, if you want to, you can go across the street and stand directly in front of the church on their sidewalk." And I was like, "So you're going to give me a criminal citation for doing this, for doing that on this sidewalk, but you're going to tell me if I go across the street, it'll be okay because it's a church?" I smiled and laughed, but I didn't go over. Uh, yeah, Cheryl, I know the chain, and the uh, the that moment when the brain leaves the station without you is just phenomenal. But it does happen. Hey, and those of you who are getting sick and tired of this window behind me, I finally bought my curtain to give me a good backdrop. It's gonna be great next week. And yeah, Jim Wright. Not only is he one of the best ranters in the world. God, when that man gets going, you just want to turn on record and say, "Have a great day," because it is a great day. He talks about you know he talks about northern Florida. I'm from Texas. I can it. I recognize it everywhere. Um, you get up here. We live in a fairly conservative area, and they were having a rally in town last Monday to save the dams. We got a congressman, uh, Dan Newhouse. You know what? I have to say, all in all, I don't think he's that bad of a fella, except for the fact that he's one of those who doesn't vote his conscience very often. He votes to stay in power. Um, and if I ever had a chance to sit down and have a beer with him, I would probably try and get to understand that better. But when I went to Washington, D.C., I stopped by his office and visited with him. And I went through his entire record before I went over there and found the three things I could say that I agreed and I thought he did a good job on. because sometimes I could have walked in his office and tell him I thought he was an idiot for being a conservative Republican, or I could tell him what I appreciated about what he did that weren't the conservative Republican type things, like his vote on trying to put protections in for indigenous women on reservations who seem to disappear in this country at a dramatic rate. And because I figure this, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And if every time you disagree with somebody on 14 topics and forget the ones you do agree with them on, you're not going to have any influence. I just hope he remembers that the thing he got complimented on was the good thing he did, and he might do good things again. The um, yeah, Jim gets wound up and lets fly. Tell you what, I don't know too many people that can make David Gerald be quiet, but I love watching it because him and David go after the things in the world that are wrong. And God knows, ever since the day that Moscow Mitch said his goal in life was to make Obama a one-term president, I knew that here was somebody who didn't care about America. He cared about white America, and it just bugged me. Of course, other things bug me too. Anybody here like critical race theory? No? No, okay. Well, anyway, I laughed my ass off because when it first came out, I went to check it out, see what is this stuff, read about it. And it really boils down to is people in power will pass laws to keep themselves in power. Uh, and they will tend to oppress people other than themselves. And as you read about the great fascism outbreak in America, it's important for them to do something silly like define the they. Who is the they? The other people. Now, this is my own take on it, so don't forgive me if I get some of the theories wrong. But once you've identified the they, who is the enemy, who is your opposition, then you have to start assigning blame to them for things. And then once you can assign blame to them, you've got all the power you need, and then you tell them that only you can protect them, your good people, your 30% of America, from all of the evils of the world. And God bless them, they've been trying to um, yeah, critical race theory is a buzzword to invoke fear and hatred. It actually is. And before it was critical race theory, it was critical theory. You know, people in power like being in power, and they will do things to stay in power. For example, and again, forgive my facts because while I'm a history buff, I sometimes get minor details wrong, but I think it was after the Civil War. They were sitting there with all these plantations owned by dead Confederate lieutenants and colonels and stuff. You didn't own, if you were enlisted, trust me, you didn't own a plantation. And they passed a kind of a homestead act to, with the objective is to encourage some black ownership. Well, okay, that was good. But then they hired local people to administer it. It turns out that hardly any black people were considered good enough or could get the right paperwork or etc. Because you got to remember it was illegal to teach a slave to read, and a lot of them still went ahead and did it, thank God. And it wound up that they said, "Oh, this program's a failure, and we're not getting them in there." And so, roughly within about a month after all of the employment contracts that people signed with their former slaves expired, and people could actually really start getting access to the land, they opened it up to um, people who hadn't been former slaves. And all of a sudden, those local county clerks had no problem doing it. And when we got done, nothing changed. Same with You guys may remember the Homestead Acts. You don't remember, but where great tracts of land out in the West were opened up for homesteading. Sounded like an equal opportunity for everybody to get out there and get some land, unless you were black and you wanted to go into some of these homestead areas that banned black folks because you could do it back then. And so, what it all got said and done, something like 98% of the land all went to white people. And you say, what does that matter? Well, let me go back to the critical theory. If you deny people the ability to accumulate wealth and deny the systems and make sure the systems don't allow it, then guess what? You're going to be able to say, well, they had all these opportunities, but they just look at them, they're still poor. And then blame them for being poor, blame people for being poor, not just the minorities. And, but at the same time, you ignore the fact that the system was built to keep them from accumulating wealth, to deny them the same opportunities. And I believe that if America is ever going to achieve its goals, it's going to be when all of a sudden opportunities are equal. When the idea of getting into college doesn't depend on whether or not your daddy went to that college, or your grandfather went to that college, or how much you donated to that college, how many buildings your ancestors have named after them that gets you that special entry. So now, America is going to have to make room for everybody to have opportunities for advancement. If they don't, then we're always going to be the rich versus the poor. And oh yeah, and don't get me. I saw the word elementary school. I don't remember the whole details of it, but my God, my granddaughter, bless her heart, she's staying with me this weekend. Everybody knows that there are pronouns that we now are actually saying to people, "Do you have a preferred pronoun?" And it's incumbent upon us to, within if your brain doesn't go flying out the station, just to use them. And that's not saying you won't make a mistake once in a while, but if you do, it's a mistake. It's not a evil. Where she said that in Wisconsin, and I haven't fact checked this, but it's my granddaughter. She's 13 years old and she's smart. Says that they're banning the use of pronouns in school. Good God, people! Florida banning math books because they don't like the wording in the word problem. I'll give them a word problem. If the rich man uh, finds out that he can raise everybody's rent and it's still cheaper than buying property, and by the way, he owns a bank and can make sure they don't get the loan, uh, what's the probability of the poor man ever getting out of poverty? I tell you, the there's a favorite movie I used to watch. Jimmy Stewart, Potter. What was the name of that movie? Somebody tell me the name of that movie. Uh, the but Jimmy Stewart's character was out there in a small savings loan, and he was giving loans to people that the rich banker said you shouldn't be giving loans to those people. They aren't worthy. And basically it was this: they were living in rundown shacks owned by the big banker and paying high rent. And here it is: somebody comes along, gives an opportunity to buy a home, and they leapt at it. And the fellow that used to play the railroad engineer on Petticoat, or the railroad inspector on Petticoat Junction, he played a character there that said, Mr. Potter, one day this young man's going to be working for him because he's doing what needs to be done. And it's a Wonderful Life. I love that movie because you know what I liked about it? It's redemption. No matter what mistakes we make, not maybe ever. I mean, I'm not sure there's any redemption for an Alex Jones other than being packed in with a bunch of geese, but that's a long story. Um, that's what, if you ever want to sell me a story, I'll tell you, throw in some redemption. Let people change their minds. Let people change. Let them find that even though they believed it, and even though they were on that path for 40 years, if they are willing to change, if they are willing to look into what's real and say, oh my God, I'm wrong. I wasted my life. Well, I tell you what, you wasted that part of your life where you were wrong, but you're going to live uh, the rest of your life um, as a far better person and a far better outcome. Um, and it's going to be great. Penance is a good start, yes. If you stole money from your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues, and all of a sudden you realize that's wrong, you might convince me that you really believe it's wrong by paying it back, doing something about it. Somewhere in a 12-step program, I think they talk about making amends. There's some things you can't make amends for, but God, you do what you can and try and make better. And remember, we are on this planet. There's a saying that, let me see. I keep the plaque here. See if I got it handy. I keep this plaque on my wall. It says, life is short, and we have little, and we have not. Turn my lamp on. Good God, I can't read in the dark. I'm getting old. You know? Remember when your grandparents would ask you to read something? You'd read it for them and wonder, why couldn't they see it? You can. It says, life is short, and we have not too much time for gladdening the hearts of those who travel this way with us. Oh, be swift to love and make haste to be kind. And that's by Henry Emile. He was a French mathematician, but I always thought that was one of the nicest things. Be good to the people around you. Kind of a golden rule. Arg! Kind of like, kind of like the Christians I like. The ones who can read the red letters in the Bible. I swear, there's a whole bunch of Christians. I'll put Joel Osteen in that category. Bless his pea pickings. Keep your muddy feet out of my tabernacle. I don't care if you're cold, wet, and hungry. Uh, that can read letters written in red. And that's good because that's the point. We're all in this together. And we got to remember that we're in it together. We got to try and treat people right. And we got to try and live our lives as if it mattered that we're doing something right. Uh, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Yeah, that brings up the filibuster. Back when, if you wanted a filibuster, you stood up, you sweated, you talked, you argued, you made your point until you couldn't anymore. These days, the filibuster is you sign a piece of paper that says, I'm going to filibuster you. You throw it in there, and then you go, you've just blocked some critical legislation. And don't get me going on Sinema and Manchin. I know they came through in the end, but God, her insisting that we keep this tax cut that keeps the rich people rich tells me who's buttering her bread. uh, but that's another story. The I will not start on Joel Osteen. I will not start on Joel Osteen. I am a calm stream, effortlessly flowing. Joel Osteen, if his God is real, that man better die in an asbestos suit. Otherwise, he's going to have a hell of an afterlife. Um, and you know what? I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I like to think that the afterlife is, if there is one, it's based on how we lived. And if you lived hating and fearing everybody around you, you're going to be in an afterlife that looks a lot like hell because you're going to hate and fear everybody around you, everything around you, and until you finally get reincorporated and have a chance to do it over again. Reincarnation is the essence of being able to have another chance. But God, you guys have had me ranting for 54 minutes. So let me tell you what's happening at B Cube Press, just so you know. We just published the Protest Diaries. Now, the Protest Diaries is not a book that's ever going to be a bestseller. It's not a book that's going to, um, be on every bookshelf in America. But I tell you what, it is a book that I put together because I was reading I read about this Navy veteran who walked up and talked to the cops and said, maybe you should, we all have rights. You don't need to be this way. And they beat the crap out of him. That's when I loaded up my car and I headed to Portland and encountered the rubber bullets, got the bear mace spray, uh, had to kneel on the ground while some woman poured milk in my eyes to get the tear gas out. And you know what? I don't regret a minute of it. I wouldn't get rid of a minute of it. This is the story of the people who have been protesting in this country. It was the protesters that led the movement, the abolitionists that led the movement to say slavery is wrong. And so those of you guys know, America knew at the beginning slavery was wrong. A whole lot of just people existed that said slavery is wrong. And we watched it dying out in the country. We watched it when Britain bans the slave trade in 1821 or something around there, and we watched it as northern states one after another. And we hear a lot about the South saying the Civil War is caused because the North was coming in to take away our slaves. Well, actually, if you want to go back and look, the southern states were looking to change the laws to force northern states to accept slavery. Um, and the northern states said no, and that gave strength to the abolitionist movement. And the next thing you know, we got southern generals uh, pushing to get their little civil war started. And 4 years later, 1 million people were dead, and slavery's gone, thank God. I don't care how many slaves you saw in the Bible, you know, it was wrong. And oh yeah, we're on the cinema thing. Yeah, cinema, Cinnamon and Mansion. Mansion, a coal miner. Well, I doubt he ever freaking pushed a wheelbarrow full of coal out of a mine in his life, but he owns coal mines, and his family owns coal mines, and his daughter. Remember when EpiPens, the prices on EpiPens all went up by a factor of 4 and 5 because they pushed a law in to require schools to have them on hand? That was his daughter. So if you don't think that there's a reason why we didn't get Medicare's ability to negotiate through, all you got to think about is the fact that the pharmaceutical industry owns, or used to own, Cinnamon and Mansion. Um, and Those two deserve each other. But in the end, they came out and gave us a bill. So that I don't consider that an absolute redemption. Uh, yeah, Manchin grew up believing he was being a robber baron. One of my favorite scenes is him sitting on his yacht in Washington. It's docked there in Washington, and his constituents rowing out in boats to tell him whose old sow ate the cabbage, and him standing on the back of his yacht defending his policies. I mean, do you need a better picture of a robber baron? Good God. So, anyway, we're about done here. I will just remind you that we have got Tom Whitmore coming in next week, and he's going to be bringing in some people to talk about very intelligently about climate change. And and that is very good. We have WorldCon coming up. I'm going to be at WorldCon. I got a couple tables, got a pile of books. We got a new book coming out called Alternative Holidays. And we put out a lot of books here at BQ Press, but I've never had one that has been the challenge and the um, reward of this book. I mean, we've got Krampus, we have Cupid, we've got Santa Claus, and there are stories in there that I think are some of the best stories I've ever read, um, um, or as good as stories as I've ever read in our anthologies. And this is one of those cases where we had so many good stories, as we did on Deathiness, that we're putting out a second volume called Spawn of Holiday, or Alternative Holiday Spawn, which is going to be the stories that were so good they could have been in the book, but they weren't because they were reprints, and we had so many of them. We only used half a dozen reprints. And so we're just putting them out in its own book, and that's co-edited by Alicia Hilton, uh, uh, whom I will tell you, in my experience, she is as good an editor as I've ever had an opportunity to work with. She she's got good eyes for looking at stories and good eyes to looking at sentences and paragraphs and story arcs. And it is always a pleasure when you get done with a book to look at the editor you've worked with and say, I have learned from them and I have learned from her. So this is going to be a good day. So that said, uh, um, the Boston Massacre happened, they said, because of a protest march. Yeah, protests, it didn't start with Black Lives Matter and it won't end with Black Lives Matter, but I tell you what, when you write the history of protesting in America, the Pink Pussy Hats, Black Lives Matter are going to be up there with the March on Washington. It is, nationwide, the world woke up a little bit, and I'm not ashamed to use the word woke. I think it's a good thing. But thank you guys for sitting here and listening to me rant unfettered. And for the record, it was 10 minutes before we went on when I found out I was doing a solo. So it's been fun, and thank each and every one of you for showing up.